Hello everybody, welcome to my channel. This is going to be the first and hopefully a longer series of videos about the hexcasting Minecraft mod. Hexcasting is a magic mod about harnessing mental energy to cast hexes, which are essentially spells. The incredible thing about this mod is just how creative you can be while designing the spells. There's really not that many limits that the mod puts on you when it comes to magic. And so the goal of these videos is to explain the mod in the best way I can for anybody who wants to learn it. When you start a world with hexcasting, you'll start with this notebook. This is in-game documentation for everything hexcasting related, although most of the categories will be locked initially. You have to progress in the mod a little bit first to unlock those. This does have basic instructions on how to get started, although the goal of these videos is to teach the mod in a YouTube format. That said, this book does have very useful information, so I will be referring to it during my videos, and I suggest you use it as a reference too. The first thing you're going to want to do to get started with hexcasting is find a geode somewhere underground. On top of the standard Minecraft amethyst shard, hexcasting adds two new types of amethyst, charged amethyst and amethyst dust. All three are very important for the mod, and you're going to want as much as possible. Fortune increases the amount of amethyst you get from an amethyst cluster, and if you have a mod like Farmer's Delight or Create installed, it's also worth harvesting the amethyst blocks, because you can crush them into more amethyst shards. Once you've gotten some amethyst for the first time, you'll notice that your notebook has some new categories unlocked. Getting started, we'll have a new chapter on geodes as well. Hexcasting category is just some tutorials about how the magic works, as well as some explanations for different concepts. Items has a list of different items you can craft using the mod's materials, and patterns is basically just a long list of the different patterns you can draw using the magic system. Before we can get into that, we'll need to explain how the magic system works. So over here is the crafting recipe for a staff. This is the first thing you're going to want to craft. You can use the charged amethyst you got earlier, as well as some wooden sticks. You can substitute the planks from any type of tree to craft a variety of different staffs. I have the dark oak staff from this chest, and it's what I'll be using during this video. Oh yeah, this over here is a jeweler's hammer. You can craft it using the sticks, some iron, and some amethyst. This is just in case you want to avoid breaking the budding amethyst inside the geodes, as it cannot destroy full blocks. It can only destroy partial blocks. So it can break amethyst clusters just fine, but it will not be able to break the budding amethyst. When you get a staff, you can right-click with it to open up the hexagonal dot grid. To draw patterns in here, all you need to do is to hold down on the dots and drag between the dots. I'm just drawing random shapes right now, but by doing it in specific shapes, you can draw patterns, and these will perform different magical actions that will allow you to cast spells. Okay, now before we can get into like all the fun magic stuff, because we're almost there, we first need to understand the two most important concepts of hexcasting, and that is iotas and the stack. Iotas sounds like a weird word, but it's simple enough. It's just an iota is a piece of information. It could be like a number, like 4, 5, or 6. It could be like an entity, like myself or a zombie, or it could be a position, like right there where I'm standing. You can create iotas by drawing different patterns, like this one right here. This one creates an iota of me. Yep, you can see that up there. That's an iota of my own entity. Now what the stack is this up here is the stack actually. If I kept creating more and more iotas, it would add more and more of my own iota to the stack. The stack is a literal stack, and there's a top and a bottom. And that's important to understand because when we use patterns like this that turns an entity on the stack into the position of its head, for example, it will affect the iota at the top. So if I drew the pattern, it would turn the iota at the top of the stack into the position of its head, so the position of my head right now. And now if I drew another pattern to add myself to the stack, it would push everything below it, and the new iota is at the top of the stack. Okay, from here on out I'm recording with different mic settings, which is why I sound different. Now with that out of the way, we can get started with some of these patterns. This pattern takes an entity iota, turns it in the direction that it's looking at. So if I were to look at the x-axis, like the red line, it would return 1, 0, and 0. It's x, y, z. So x being 1 means I'm looking in the x direction. Okay, now this is a very important pattern, the archer's distillation. This takes 2 iotas. So let's clear our grid. The first is the iota of the position, the origin position, you could say, which we usually get our head for this. And then you get the position of the direction that you're looking at. So this is the one that we used before, and the one that we used even earlier. So we combine those, and now the archer's distillation will return the block that we were looking at. So this position is the position of this block right here, because that's the block we were looking at. This sequence of patterns right here is very important. It is the shortest way that you can draw a pattern that gets the block that you're looking at. It's very important. This right here is the Scout's distillation. It does basically the same thing, but instead of getting the position of a block that you're looking at, it instead returns the iota of an entity that you're looking at. So if I were to spawn a pig right here and draw this same mantra but with the Scout's distillation instead of the archer's distillation, it returns the pig. If we weren't looking at anything, it would return null instead. Let me show you. Since there's no entity, it has nothing to return, so it just tells you null. There's nothing there. Reveal is just a useful pattern to know for when you're testing complicated spells. It just takes the top iota of the stack and displays it in chat. So now it displays my username in chat because the top iota is an iota of me or myself. If I were to convert that into the position of my head and then draw a reveal again, it displays the position of my head in chat. Okay, now we can actually get into some useful stuff. This is a pattern that breaks the block of the position that we give it. So it takes one position iota stack and breaks the block in that location. This is the position we got from our head earlier, so let's draw the pattern. It was in the air, but you could see a little burst of particles right there. So let's get one of these fences. Let's draw the way to get the block that we're looking at. So we get myself, we get the position of my head, we get myself again, we get the direction that I'm looking in, and we draw the archer's distillation. Now, we draw this pattern right here to break the block. There we go. The fence has been broken, and the pig is free. Oh yeah, one thing that we should talk about before we wrap up for today is energy. Energy in hexcasting is called media, and we need it to fuel our spells. What we can basically use for media is amethyst. It's basically crystallized media, and that's why we gathered so much of it in the geode, because we need it to fuel our spells. 1 amethyst dust is, well, 1 amethyst dust. In terms of costs, 1 shard of amethyst is worth 5 dust, and 1 charged amethyst is worth 10 dust. Most spells and a select few patterns require amethyst to be used. Break block, for example, requires around 1 amethyst dust, and the archers and scouts distillations over here require a negligible amount of energy. Although, one thing that's important to understand is that if we were to use one of these, the amount of energy they require is around 0.01 amethyst dust. But that amount is not zero, and it will always use a full item whenever amethyst costs are applied. What I mean by that is, let's say, to survival mode. If I were to use one of these, you can see that the one amethyst dust that was in my inventory disappeared, even though the cost for these is much smaller. That's because that when an energy cost is applied, it will always use an entire item, meaning even if you had like a charged amethyst in your inventory, casting even this pattern, which requires a much smaller amount, will use the entire crystal. That's why it's important that for now you have good amounts of both amethyst dust and other types of amethyst in your inventory. Alright, that's it for this episode. This was meant to be just a short introductory episode into the mechanics of the hex casting mod. In the next tutorial, we'll be looking at some pages from the hex notebook, as well as going over how to use some very important items for the mod. But until then, that's everything. Bye-bye.